In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the concept of closures. If you're coming from C or C++, you can think of closures like private variables and methods to use in a class. But JavaScript does not have the concept of private variables and private functions, so we try to imitate that concept of private variables and functions through the concept known as closures. Now, if you have a function, I remember I shared previously that functions are actually objects. So they have the properties, and equally they have methods as well. Now the built-in method for every function is the return keyword. When you declare a variable inside a function, that variable is private to this function. That means that you cannot use that variable outside of this function. Now, let's say for instance, now we have this function that has persons and it has a name, city, and its friendly variables. If we try to call this function and then we try to specify to get name or city and its friendly, we cannot be able to get that. That is because these variables are only private to this function. Now, how can we actually make use of the private variables and functions inside of a function? That is what is called closures. Now, this thing is actually called closures because they are private to this function. If we go through this other code right now, you can see we have a function, we have the same details. These are actually closures which are actually private to this function alone within the scope of this function. If you don't know about scope, I will do another video that actually explains scope. You can follow along after this time. Other than that, you can still go out, you can still continue with this lesson. When I do the lesson on scope, you follow along and all that. Now, when we have these private variables, we can use we can use the return keyword to either use a function or we use an object to expose the private variables and functions that are actually declared in this function. That's exactly how we are able to get. So what about in conclusion, I'll say that closures are actually private variables that are only accessible within the scope of a function. That is what closures are. So you can think about it. You can think about it like this diagram. This is actually a person's function, and then there's another um, data inside that actually has the, the properties and then the methods of this function, which is person, which is this person function. Now, by default, every function actually has a return keyword. Now, this return keyword is actually what is used, method, sorry, to use to manipulate or actually send out most of these details. In the next video, I'll do a demonstration of how closure actually works.